Among the U.S. government's recent attacks on public health are steps it's taken to dismantle the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, the research agency charged with safeguarding workers' health. This disruption could have important implications for workers in a range of industries. I'm Stephen Morrissey, managing editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, and I'm talking with Andrew Gabrielson, a pediatric urology fellow at Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. Dr. Gabrielson has co-authored a perspective article about cuts to NIOSH's infrastructure and their potential effects. Dr. Gabrielson, what types of occupational hazards are U.S. workers exposed to, and how common are these work-related injuries and illnesses?
Each year in the United States, about 5,500 workers die from occupational injuries, and millions more experience work-related injuries and illnesses, the direct and indirect cost of which is estimated to be between $2 and $300 billion annually. The most common occupational hazards in the U.S. are musculoskeletal stressors, so things like repetitive motion injuries, trips, and falls. There are chemical exposures and also biologic exposures. We've also seen emerging hazards, including new infectious diseases, extreme heat exposures, and psychosocial stressors, things like job insecurity and burnout.
Historically, what's been the role of NIOSH in protecting workers, and how is it different from other federal or state agencies?
So NIOSH serves two major roles. The first of which is it is the federal agency responsible for conducting research and making recommendations for the prevention of work-related injury and illness. Unlike the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, which is more of a household name, OSHA issues and enforces standards that employers must comply with to maintain safe workspaces. On the other hand, NIOSH generates the science that underpins these standards and best practices. So NIOSH plays a critical role in the passage of these standards and ensuring that policy is backed by the best science. The other role that NIOSH plays is in education. NIOSH supports 18 education and research centers, which are academic institutions that provide high-quality training in occupational medicine. These centers have trained over 20,000 physicians, nurses, and industrial hygienists, serving as the main pipeline for training occupational medicine experts in the United States.
You say in your perspective article that in recent months, various NIOSH programs have been frozen and laboratories have closed. What's the status of funding and personnel cuts at the agency now?
The situation is constantly in flux. In April of this year, the federal government eliminated over 80% of NIOSH staff. And although several court orders reinstated some workers, many facets of the agency remain inoperable. We've already seen some laboratories and surveillance programs halt operations, notably in West Virginia and Washington State, although some of these workers have been called back. Education and research centers across the country are preparing for closures if their grants run out. And so this is a real boots on the ground issue in terms of training the next generation of occupational medicine specialists.
And what about the future? Have further cuts been proposed, or are they being pursued?
At this point, it's still unclear how severe the cuts will be. There's a little bit of a silver lining that a Senate Appropriations Committee recommended that NIOSH receive an actual $1 million increase in funding for fiscal year 2026, rejecting the 80% cut in funding that was proposed by the current administration. So it's unclear if they're going to meet in the middle, or this is going to be something that's going to be more permanent in terms of the drastic cuts that have been proposed.
How has the administration explained or defended these cuts to research on worker safety?
The justifications for these cuts are similar to those being used to cut funding and personnel to other federal and public health agencies, namely efficiency and cost savings. But I think these arguments miss the mark for NIOSH in particular. Its federal mandate dictates that it be separate from OSHA, the regulatory body, to generate independent science to back policy. And keeping these entities separate is crucial to keeping the science apolitical. Additionally, eliminating the funding that goes into NIOSH, which is just 0.2% of the HHS budget, is hardly cost savings when you account for the billions of dollars in annual savings that NIOSH activities contribute to.
What, if any, NIOSH functions could effectively be passed off to other organizations or agencies? And in what areas would you expect these cuts or any sort of reorganization to cause fundamental harm?
One of the activities that has been suggested as being able to be consolidated is the use of personal protective equipment and the manufacturing and use of these devices, namely in healthcare settings. But since infectious diseases and major usage of these devices is something that crosses state lines, I do think it's important to keep this as a federal issue and as something that a federal agency such as NIOSH should continue to provide guidance on.
Finally, in addition to those public health harms, what could be the policy ramifications of federal reforms that substantially weaken NIOSH?
OSHA is already slow in terms of passing standards, these new rules that employers are mandated to follow to keep workplaces safe. Standards can take decades to pass, and they often can cross administrations. However, without high quality evidence that's either reviewed or generated by NIOSH, that process becomes even slower and more vulnerable to legal challenges. So, in practice, it means emerging threats, new occupational hazards won't be addressed until after workers are being harmed.
Thank you, Dr. Gabrielson.